This is the future of classic camper vans. Welcome to edubconversions.co.uk. My name is Kit Lacey, director and founder, and I'm so excited to be talking to you today about this, our 2026 100% electrification system for classic VW camper vans such as these. In this video, we're going to be digging into the specs of the kit you see before you, and also telling you about the decisions that we've made over the last 12 years of converting classic camper vans to electric. So grab yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and let's dig into it. So let's start with an overview of the entire system. So the best way to think about this is like an engine swap. So imagine you're taking the engine and the gearbox and the petrol tank out of your classic camper van and replacing it with an eDub electric system. That's roughly how to imagine it in the vehicle. And that's the kind of layout that you're seeing before you. So we've assembled it on this rig so that you can see roughly how it all fits together. What you've got is at the front there, you've got your main battery box. Now, we have conversion packages available in 4 different capacities. So we have access to 4 different size battery capacities, which obviously give you a difference in range and also a difference in cost as well. But they all fit into the same size box, which is really impressive. The only exception is that our really small packs have a different section in the center that lets the box be a little bit smaller. But ultimately, it doesn't make much difference to the fitment inside the vehicle. You don't gain anything by clearing up some of that space. But the battery box at the front there is what contains all of the high voltage battery capacity. Now, high voltage in this context is about 350 volts nominal, and that's for a variety of reasons. So we've done a handful of conversions where they have been what we would call low voltage, so around the 100 volt mark, a little bit more, a little bit less. So Indy, for example, behind me, is about 140 volt system, and we've done things like Morris Minors, which have been down to 80 volts, 90 volt systems. Now, they are perfect if the system that you're installing is only doing kind of short drives or is only doing day trips, but isn't very great for doing any longer distance travel or touring, which a lot of our camper van customers demand. So having a higher voltage system means broadly 2 things. It's more efficient power, for one, having a higher voltage system. It gives us access to rapid charging systems, and I'll go into that a bit more in a moment. And it also gives us access to better drive unit systems, such as our eDub drive unit here as well. So all of those come together to make a really robust package. Plus, it's massively comparable, obviously, with most of the modern electric vehicles that are on the road. They're at the same kind of voltage. So compatibility with things like charging stations means that the camper van doesn't stand out other than how beautiful it is. Now, just like, again, a modern electric vehicle, you have what would be felt like as an automatic drive system. Now, it's not technically automatic because it's not automatically changing gears, but this here is our eDub drive unit, which is an electric motor, which is at the 350 volts that we mentioned earlier, and that is powering a single speed reduction gearbox here on the side. So all that's doing is changing the ratio from the speed of the motor down to a differential that goes to the rear wheels. All you really need to know about that is that that's roughly taking the place of the engine and gearbox, and that's roughly where it sits. So your original VW gearbox would have been in about this place in the vehicle, and so we substitute that with our eDub drive unit, and that's providing really efficient power. There's no longer a clutch, you've got no longer a gear stick, you are just simply turning the vehicle on, there's a switch to tell you which direction you want to go, and then you would just squeeze down on the throttle, and that's all it is, and off you go. It's really brilliant, because actually what's quite commonly, when you're driving a classic camper van, changing gear is one of the most complicated things, in my opinion, and from talking to people, sometimes stirring porridge is the expression we get. When you're just trying to find the right gear, you're doing it quite frequently, you haven't got a massively powerful engine in the camper vans originally, so finding the right gear to give you the power you needed was always a bit of a struggle. And trying to run any electric power through an original gearbox has its limitations. The original gearbox was never designed to handle the torque of an electric motor. So it will work, but not for very long. So by completely changing the system to provide a new gearbox and a new motor, is now providing that power to the wheels in a really clean and efficient way. And there's no longer any bottlenecks in power delivery, meaning that you can just get that power straight into the wheels exactly where you want them to be. The final part of what you see before you is this section up here. So this is our petrol tank shelf. So you have to imagine this is where the petrol tank used to be in a VW camper. So if you were looking in through the engine bay, like behind me, and we will look at that in detail in a moment, you would see through there the engine, and behind the engine on an upper shelf above the gearbox was this section here. Now, without a petrol tank in there anymore, that's a lovely open space for all our extra components. So what you see here closest to you is the motor controller for the eDub drive unit. So that's doing a handful of things, but it's mainly taking the DC voltage from the battery pack, changing it into AC voltage to run into the motor. And then it's picking up off lots of other signals on the vehicle, such as your direction and your throttle and fan control for temperature to run that efficiently into the motor. It's also picking up off a battery management system in the battery pack. So if the battery is very high, then it will reduce the regenerative braking, so you don't go too high over the top of the pack. And likewise, at the very bottom of the pack, it will reduce the power that's able to go to the motor so that you can stop safely if you completely run out of power. The other things that go on this petrol tank shelf are other essentials, such as your charger. So when you are charging at home, you will use an AC charger that's built into the vehicle. So you just plug that into a home charger. That would take power from the building and from the grid, AC power, and would change it into DC power to go into the battery box. And also a DC-DC converter. That's acting like your alternator. So what that does, this system still does require a 12-volt battery to turn on, just like every car. So it's like a giant computer, and it still needs a little bit of power of 12 volts to actually switch everything on. And then the DC-DC converter takes care of keeping that 12-volt battery topped up while it's being used. Then in addition, we've got a couple of other things that we can add to the system, and they get installed on this modular petrol tank shelf. So we have things like an off-grid inverter that allows you to use the main battery pack, but for kind of home appliances like induction hobs and charging laptops, things like that. And we also have things like coolant heaters. So if you need the batteries, if you're operating the vehicle in very cold temperatures, sub-zero temperatures, you can run a coolant heater that will warm those batteries up very slightly and allow it to run efficiently rather than running at sub-zero temperatures. Things that aren't on this rig are things like our eDub control board, which I'll show you in the vehicle. So that's your 12-volt battery and a ton of control systems that are making sure that everything's operating safely. And also the CCS actual rapid charging socket as well, which I will show you in these vehicles of what that looks like. There's a couple of places that can go. Other than that, there's a few things in the cab, which again, I'll show you in these two vehicles, where you've got new dials, you've got a new throttle pedal, and you've got a gear selector as well. There are other things you can add, such as heating, air conditioning, that all run off the high voltage system. So it's a complete package that covers all bases. But why don't we dig in depth now into some of the parts that you see in front of you? So the battery pack itself has been expertly engineered to fit very snugly into where the engine used to be inside the classic campers. Now, it's compatible with all classic campers from the split screen 1950 all the way up to bay windows, which goes up to 1979, and it is compatible with any Brazilian models as well. So for a short time, VW stopped making T2s, so bay windows. They moved on to the T25, or if you're an American watching this video, they moved on to the T3. That's the more boxy version. These conversion systems won't fit the T25 or the T3 because just the space in the back of them isn't identical. But what happened when VW stopped making them is there was a factory in Brazil that took over manufacturing and kept making the split screen and the bay window models right the way up to 2013. So basically, if it looks like a split screen or looks like a bay window, then this system will fit into those models. So it's been built to go right up to the top of the engine bay, so pretty snug, not touching, but close to, right up inside. And then the bottom of the system is no lower than the original exhaust would have been, so your clearance is identical to what it was before. It is a little bit heavier than it used to be, so it's about 150 kilos heavier than it was. So you've got to imagine that that's just like throwing a few suitcases into the back of the vehicle. So these camper vans, one of the reasons we love converting them is they're so versatile. They were built to handle, especially split screens, they were built to handle a ton of internal extras. So whether that was for cargo, for logistics, for trade customers, or whether it was just camper vans, which is why they had such an explosion of camper van interiors, things like that. They were capable of holding that much weight, and we've kept our systems well within that tolerance. So what that does look like is as if you've put two big suitcases in the back. So it can sit a little bit far back, but that's no problem at all because we have systems to be able to adjust the rear suspension to let it sit back at a level height. It's absolutely no problem at all for us to take care of that. You've still got loads of payload on top of that as well. So if you did want to throw a few extra suitcases in there, that's absolutely no problem. You've still got the limit to be able to do that. So adding weight doesn't make much difference. The battery pack itself, so it's it's very simple install because the frame that we've built on the bottom here is separate to the battery box. So the installation method is that the frame and the drive unit would be installed first, and they just kind of cover around the outside of the engine bay. Once that's all installed and tightened up and all secure, and we're making sure that we've got the adjustments right in the vehicle, the battery box is separate. So the battery box can actually be kind of slid in and raised up. Now, if it's a split screen or an early bay camper, the whole bumper section can be removed from the vehicle. So you can actually install these battery boxes, not quite the subframe, although you probably could. The battery box itself can actually be installed and removed without the vehicle being off the floor, which is brilliant. And it's just like the original VW was designed to do. However, later bays, such as Indy behind us and other crossover or late bay VW campers, they have a permanent bumper section underneath. So you do have to raise the vehicle up, put the battery box underneath it, and then either raise the battery box in or lower the vehicle down on top. What you have inside this battery box is mostly batteries, obviously. Now, the biggest capacity that's currently available with the modular size that will fit is a 62 kilowatt hour battery pack. Now, we've got a range of 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour out of that pack, which is a real world range of 192 miles, which is just absolutely incredible for the systems that we're using. Now, we're not used to that range at all. And I'll tell you from experience, these campers actually, this is maybe a bit rude, the campers themselves are beautiful. They're not the most comfortable to be driving in for 2, 3, 4 hours. So actually forcing you to stop after 2 or 3 hours to plug in and charge at a rapid charger and grab yourself a coffee isn't a bad thing. That level of range is absolutely fine. But that's our biggest pack. And then our smallest pack is a brand new 42 kilowatt hour pack. So our smallest pack now will get you 115, 120 miles range. So you've now got a really decent range across all our packages. And those most affordable packages are no more expensive than they used to be. So our previous generation of the conversion systems, where we used to have a 37 kilowatt hour pack, that's now been improved to 42, no change in price. So that's really impressive. On the front of the box here, you can't see it, but behind this access panel is all the complicated bits. I'll do a cutaway, I'm sure, of what we've got on the shelf behind the camera of some battery boxes that are currently being built, and they will show you that you've got, on that panel, you've got high voltage contactors, you've got your battery management system, and you've also got a handful of fuses and things like that that are running to all different parts of the vehicle. What that's doing is keeping everything outside the battery box as safe as possible. Obviously, high voltage is not something to be messed with. Regulations of getting that high voltage from the battery pack out of the box are incredibly strict. Here at eDub, we always follow the latest global advice over high voltage applications within vehicles. In the UK, it's a really strange grey area because the modifications seen in the UK is so vast that organisations such as the DVLA haven't quite been able to pinpoint exactly what they want people to do about it. So we don't just follow the base, we go up to actually the highest safety level of using things like orange connectors, safety disconnect sockets, all the right cabling and fusing, etc., to make sure that they follow the regulations of some of the most strict countries around the world. Which also means that our campers and our conversion systems are universal globally at the moment. And if anything does change, we can modify those very simply. So for example, there are slightly different regulations over in New Zealand, where we have a partner, and they have slightly different regs over how to control the battery power that's coming out of the box. But it's a simple change that we can make to our systems to allow them to be compatible with a New Zealand regulation. Also on the front here, you've got things like your battery blow off. So what that's doing is keeping the pressure, because obviously it's a sealed box, to make sure that there's no elements and moisture or rain or wet roads that can get in or out of the box. So having the blow off gives a bit of flexibility as the temperature changes inside the box. You've got things like your coolant settings on there as well. So if you're running some of our higher packs that do allow rapid charging, then you have liquid cooling that's running through some coolant plates on the modules to keep them really chilled. And that's really efficient, being able to make sure that as you are doing multiple stops and doing multiple charges, that your batteries are staying happy. They operate, they're a bit like human beings. They kind of like to operate around, 25 degrees. If you go too much hotter than that, then they really get uncomfortable. And likewise, too much colder, they don't love it. So batteries being able to run at that optimal temperature is really efficient. And I mentioned before about you can have a coolant heater, a bit of a strange thing to have. But what that can do is if you are in very cold climates, then the coolant can run through a coolant heater, which will warm that coolant up very slightly if you are operating in kind of really, really, really cold temperatures. All of your high voltage outlets are also on the front here, and those are specifically installed at a location where they can be A, accessible, but they can also B, be protected by the rear bumper. So I'll show you in the vehicles, but the rear bumper of the vehicle goes just over these sockets, and that's deliberate, so that if there was any impact to the vehicle, first of all, campers are pretty robust, so if there was any impact, I think the camper would be fine, but it protects the high voltage sockets there as well. There'll be tons of safety systems that would automatically shut off what was happening in the vehicle, but having it extra protected down there is really, really smart. So you've got smaller sockets that go to things like your charger and your DC-DC converter, your off-grid inverter, heating, etc. You've got larger sockets that go to your CCS rapid charging and also to your motor inverter as well. You've also got just general in-out sockets for all of the wiring, so a lot of the intelligent stuff is happening inside the battery box, and so having that wiring communication between the two is really straightforward. So now let's take a quick look at the eDub drive unit, and we'll go a bit more in depth into what that's capable of doing in the VW camper. So one thing we've struggled with almost right from the beginning with campers is how to get a really super efficient, super reliable motor to deliver the power efficiently into the vehicle. Now, if you went online and you Googled electric conversions of classic camper vans and you bypassed eDub, then you would find quite a few of systems where you keep the original gearbox and you have an electric motor that simply bolts onto the gearbox just like the engine used to go. That's a really efficient way of doing it because you're not having to modify loads about the vehicle. You're actually running, gear stays the same, your drive shaft stay the same, your wheels stay the same. The motor will actually bolt onto the gearbox and doesn't need to be supported at the other end. So you don't have to, you should, and you can do it quite simply, but it can just bolt onto the gearbox and it's big enough to just hold itself onto the gearbox, which is quite cool. But the downside there is that it takes up most of that engine bay. So you haven't got space to put batteries in that rear space. So you'll see, similar to Indy actually. So Indy was designed, that was the only technology available 12 years ago when we first converted Indy, is we had to put battery boxes inside the vehicle because there was no space in the rear without doing some really complicated manufacturing. But as that progressed, there was really no other options. So if you've seen some of our previous videos, we had Tesla drive units for quite a long time. And they were brilliant because they were, first of all, they were powerful enough. And it's always better to have a more powerful motor and have to turn it down than to have it the other way around. So the Tesla drive units were obviously too powerful. We were able to tune those down to provide the power more efficiently. But they sat, so again, picture what's in front of us here and picture it as a very precise kind of cross-section of the space in the back of a vehicle of the VW camper. So here at the front, here is where the gearbox would mount onto the axle. And then at the front here, you've got your kind of petrol tank shelf. And that was kind of the space roughly where the gearbox would need to sit. So you needed something that would take up that space. Otherwise, it's into the engine bay, or it goes too high, or it goes too wide. So the Tesla drive unit was quite smart because it was able to be mounted on the rear. And it gave you a lot of space to then put battery boxes over the top. And we did that for several years. But the downside, of course, is that you can't buy Tesla drive units from Tesla or from anywhere. You can't buy them brand new. So you are always having to kind of trust on, and we had a lot of companies that did this for us. So we had some suppliers that really put a lot of effort into taking salvaged Tesla drive units, checking them all over, making sure they were fine, and installing them into the vehicles. And for most of the time, that was absolutely fine because actually Tesla drive units, if a Tesla was involved in a crash, and it was written off, the drive unit was untouched. It was in its own little frame, and drive units kind of last forever. So taking them and getting them checked over and installing them didn't have much of a problem. But it did mean that we couldn't offer a decent warranty for the Tesla drive units because they were used. And also they weren't massively compatible. So you couldn't completely hack how they were working to match up with the other clever systems that were going on. So they kind of operated in their own little silo of power. And that just meant it was good enough, but it wasn't good for the long term. It was also that the width of the Tesla drive unit meant that it could only be situated with the motor section towards the back of the vehicle and the differential in the middle, which then made you took up the bottom half of your engine bay and you had to then put batteries on top of it and you had no space. Now, the eDub drive unit completely revolutionizes that. So first of all, about the space, as you can see here, from your angle, and you're looking as if you were from the front of the vehicle, you've got the motor closest to you and the differential is down in between, which means we've now, compared to the Tesla unit, flipped that round. And we've only been able to do that because the physical size of the motor is just, if it was any bigger, it wouldn't fit inside the swing arms and the suspension system of the original VW. Because remember, we're trying to change as little of the VW itself as possible. So having a motor that was exactly the right width and height was incredibly important. Coupled with that is you then also had the side of, well, it needs to then produce the right amount of power. So finding the right voltage was key, so running it at 350 volts. But we developed a system where it can run with really, really precise power. So it actually runs, it can run at a peak of up to 150 brake horsepower, which is quite ludicrous, especially for a classic camper. Now, a VW camper, even a really good one, like a bay window, came out of the factory with, on paper, something like 45 brake horsepower. And that was only about 3,000 RPM, and if you were going downhill and the wind was behind you, you never really got it. And so to be able to just increase that massively is just such a, well, it's such a great thing, but it's also one of the biggest concerns about driving these campers was the lack of power. So to immediately cross off that concern means you don't have that anxiety when you're jumping in an eDub electric conversion, because you can just put your foot down and off you go. It's got 285 Newton meters of torque from 0 RPM. So again, horsepower is how quickly you can get from A to B at a certain speed. So horsepower is that kind of continuous speed. And so if you're just trying to drag race or driving on motorways a lot of the time, horsepower is important. But for us, we feel like actually the experience of driving an electric vehicle, it's the torque that matters most. It's that ability to set off quickly at a roundabout. We've all been there. Roundabouts busy, you're right at the front, there's a queue behind you. You want to make sure you can get out into the traffic without suddenly holding everyone up or causing half an injury or just closing your eyes as you try and pull out too slowly in a classic camper. That's no longer a problem. You can just put your foot down, you can get out really quick. Same thing at traffic lights, things like that. And sometimes that's the most fun thing as well, because nobody is expecting that. I mean, you could get a camper up to 60 miles an hour eventually and nobody really notices. You pass them on the motorway all the time. So getting the top speed isn't, although they can go faster, they can go comfortably 70 plus miles per hour. But it's the torque that's the most fun. So 285 Newton meters of torque from 0 RPM is really competitive. And it's so much fun to be able to drive like that. Then, of course, there's the eDub controller on the top there, part of the eDub drive unit. So that is taking the DC power from the battery pack and converting it into AC power down into the motor as well. And that's a really smart system that's also controlling a handful of other things like your throttle, it's controlling your gear selection, and it's sending signals to the dials in the front of the vehicle in terms of speed and temperature as well. Overall, a really, really tidy system. Now, the eDub drive unit, a little aside for a moment, if you'll bear with me, the eDub drive unit is available to purchase as a separate part. So we sell the eDub drive unit separately. So if you're considering electrification of your own fleet, maybe you're thinking about starting your own electric conversion business, or you've got a particular project in mind that you want to electrify, then why not contact us about the eDub drive unit? Because if those stats match up with something you're interested in, we have those available to purchase. So that's my little aside about the eDub drive unit. So now let's take a look at what the whole system actually looks like in the vehicle. So I thought it was important to show you what the whole system looked like outside of the pack, because This is what it looks like when it's in the vehicle. You can kind of barely notice. And actually, with the boot closed, you wouldn't notice anything different about it at all. Now, we do offer things like LED upgrades for the lights. So there is a small, sometimes, indication that someone's taken care of the vehicle. But when it comes to electrification, there's not much that would kind of be glaringly obvious. And that is deliberate. What we never wanted to create was something that really stood out and that had kind of garish or glaringly obvious issues, or not issues, but glaringly obvious differences. And, you know, we wanted something where, and I've seen plenty of conversions that are a bit like this, either in the back or in the front. Now, we've been guilty of this to some level in the past, where you've had a charge port in the boot lid so that you could access it from outside the vehicle, or in the petrol tank cap, which is an option. And some people actually want that because they want the easy access. But I also love that we can put our systems into vehicles and you can have it completely kind of hidden and invisible, like the system that we have here. I've also seen plenty of systems where the method of controlling the drive unit system, it's essential for you to have basically a small tablet in the front of the vehicle that's doing a lot of your control system. So you won't have a gear selector, for example. You'll have a big tablet that's got a drive and a neutral and a reverse, and you have to use that tablet to drive. And that's great, but if you don't like that, if you don't want your vehicle to look super modern in the cab, and you don't want to have a touchscreen to say which way you want to go, then you've got no choice with some of those other systems. Whereas with our systems, you've got loads of choice to be able to change all those things. So what you have here is, as we said before, this is what we looked at previously. So you've got your battery pack here. Now, this is a split screen camper van, which means the bumper is fully removable. So the white bit of the bumper here and also this blue section here can be removed completely. Now, we do have to alter this section very slightly. So originally the engine was a lot smaller. So this piece here, the curve on the inside of it was smaller. So we do have to alter that very slightly, just widen that gap and put a bit of edging around the inside there. But you wouldn't notice unless I told you, like I just did. But inside the vehicle, this is all bolted on. So the subframe that we were looking at before is bolted onto the original mounting points on the side that are holding your bumper on. So they're straight onto the axles. They're not adding anything to the vehicle. So they are connecting to the original mounting holes that are already there. So nobody's going to get in trouble with modifying the vehicle. And then you've also got other features that we talked about before. So the CCS rapid charging system right here. So at the top section of CCS stands for Combined Charging System, combined because it's combining both AC and DC charging. So the top section that you've got here is a Type 2 charger. It's also available with Type 1 charging if you're in America, so we can provide it with Type 1 charging as well. That's your kind of home charging. So you'd connect that to a home charger or a workplace charger. Or if you're going for like a day trip, sometimes you'll have like destination chargers for like tourist destinations, and just plug in while you're there, no problem. But if you're wanting the rapid charging, so that's up to 70 kilowatts, 74 kilowatts technically, of speed. So that tops you up in about half an hour, 45 minutes. Then you would remove the bottom section and you connect the CCS charger into those two that way round. And then we just have a little button on the bottom that glows in the colors to tell you what's happening with the system, whether it's happy, whether it's thinking, whether it's got an error. And then also that's your lock release button as well. So some chargers will need you to physically unlock, because there's a little locking pin that holds the charger into the socket, because obviously it's very, very high current, high voltage power that's moving between the charge station and the vehicle when you've got rapid charging going on. So the vehicle locks those two pieces together so that it can't be accidentally pulled out or knocked out. So pressing that button releases that in the vehicle as well. And they've got little rubber caps on. And then in this vehicle, as with a lot of our vehicles, it's fully protected in the engine bay as well. You've also got your cooling system over here on the left-hand side. So that is cooling both the drive unit and the inverter system. Now, the inverter and drive unit, so the motor is water-cooled that we looked at before from the eDub drive unit, and the inverter as well. They run on the same coolant loop. That is also being shown as a temperature on the gauge at the front of the vehicle, because we've found over 12 years of converting campers to electric, we found that motor or inverter temperature is one of the first signs of a problem, and it's one of the most costly mistakes if something was to go wrong with the vehicle. So if something has failed with the cooling system of the drive unit, the system will safely turn itself off, but it's good for you to be able to know why. So just like with a regular car, you'd have a warm engine light. Similar to that, there is something in front of you that says, hey, there's a problem in this particular area. You've also got your battery cooling on the side here as well. So again, and those have fans mounted to those pieces that trigger and turn on when the temperatures get up to certain levels. So they're not just running the whole time. They only turn on when they're absolutely needed. And then finally, on the side down here where your original 12-volt battery used to go is a new, smaller lithium-ion 12-volt battery and our eDub control board. Now that's doing a combination of things, but it's mostly fuses and relays to be able to keep all of the electrification system nice and safe. And it's been deliberately designed over the last 12 years. Again, like everything else, it's constantly evolving and changing, becoming more streamlined to not just keep everything safe, which is quite basic, but to be intelligent about doing that and to make certain conditions so that if one thing doesn't work, something else doesn't work as well. That's been tried and tested over a decade. And that just sits nice and snug down in this back corner. So that's everything you can see back here. So why don't we take one quick look at what's inside the vehicle. We're going to start with the cab, and then I will show you a couple of the added features in the living space in this particular camper as well. So the first thing to notice in the cab is obviously, well, I think obviously, is not much to notice. It's just kind of, initially you look at it and you go, this is gorgeous. It's still got its original steering wheel, it's still got original seats, still got original handbrake, original brake. This one's actually had power steering fitted, which personally I absolutely love. And it's one of those modern things as well. Like when you don't have it, you're probably used to driving modern cars that all have power steering now. When you don't have power steering, you really do feel it. So driving some vehicles without it can feel a bit strong on your arms. Power steering, absolutely love it. But hopefully you kind of look again and you kind of go, do you know what? There's some really classy things going on here that either I don't quite recognize or are a little bit different. So first of all, there's extra things. Like I said, there's power steering that's been done on this vehicle. That's kind of nothing to do with the electric conversion. You can have power steering on any classic camper van, but we can fit that for you if you're bringing your vehicle to us for conversion. We've also got, in my opinion, quite a smart stereo system in there as well. What I love about this is actually it's got a screen that comes out, so you can use satellite navigation, you can use your phone to do Apple Maps, Google Maps, things like that. And it's also got kind of full Bluetooth connectivity and all those kind of fancy things that you would expect from a modern car system. But the screen disappears when you're not using it, which means, and I love this, it means it doesn't stand out and look really garish. And I love it because it's in those beautiful kind of black and chrome hints, which the rest of the vehicle is doing the same thing. So those are just camper van things. That's nothing to do with our conversion. But what you're missing, of course, in here compared to an original camper is there's no gear stick and there's no clutch. So because of the eDub drive unit being effectively like an automatic drive, you haven't got either of those two items, which basically means your left foot is just super lazy. But in the front here, everything still runs off the original key. So we've deliberately, again, rather than having big start buttons, which are a bit garish, or you would have to get rid of the barrel and get rid of the key, and actually having the key as an extra piece of security, and you've already got it and you're already used to it. So if you're ever turning the vehicle on, you put the key in the switch, give it a little turn. You'll hear a couple of the systems turn on in the back, a couple of clicks just to make sure everything turns on, and then some things come to life in front of you. So I'm just thinking, is the stereo going to come alive? Yeah. Sometimes it kicks its screen out at you, but not today. So from here, your dial will turn on originally. So this is a beautiful replica dial in front of you that's showing your speed like it used to, and it's also showing you your state of charge as well. So you can get a really good idea of how much capacity you've got left in your tank of batteries. And then the motor temperature gauge up here that I told you about before. Down here on the side, you've got your gear selector. So effectively, all you're doing is switching it to drive or you're switching it to reverse, and that's all you need to do. You don't really need to pay any more attention to it. It's really smart. On the opposite side, in this particular vehicle, this conversion has featured all the extra mod cons. So it's got heating and air conditioning as well. Now, those units are installed into a box that in this particular conversion is under the seat behind here, because traditionally, an air conditioning system would be in a bonnet of a vehicle, and there isn't a bonnet anymore. And you could put it right in the engine bay, but then it falls foul of the problem the original campers had, where they couldn't get the changed air, the hot air or the cold air, from the back all the way to the front again. So we try and reduce that distance by putting it just behind the rear seat. We've also got some fun systems where if you're just having heating, you can actually, especially in a split screen, there's a little compartment just down here which you can fit it in, which is really super smart. That's got some controls on down here. So you've got heater button, air conditioning button, and a blower to move that air up to the front as well. And that doesn't change anything as it comes through into the front of the vehicle. So you've still got fresh air above your head, and this comes up through the totem pole column up the center onto your legs or onto your windscreen. So you can have really efficient hot or cold air in those two locations. This one's had LED upgrades as well. So turning on the lights glows up the dials really beautifully. We've got kind of deliberately off-white LEDs in this particular conversion, so they don't look so garish. I think it looks really, really super smart. Other than that, everything in the front looks and feels original, which also means if you were to do any interior upgrades or upholstery upgrades, you can. You're not tied to having to find a garage that's only used to doing electric conversions or keep coming back to us for all those kind of things. If you've got a favorite garage or someone who's always taken care of your VW, they can keep doing that because the electric conversion system isn't influencing a ton of those areas, which keeps the vehicles more versatile. And I also love it because it keeps those other garages operational. You know, our passion is about keeping these vehicles on the road for as long as possible so they can be enjoyed, but there are also tons of people, interior specialists, paint specialists, other restoration specialists, and it's keeping those guys in a job as well. So respect your mechanics. Let's take a look at the interior of this one. So this one in particular has got a couple of extra features in the interior. So one of the add-ons that you can have with your electric conversion is something called an off-grid inverter that takes your DC power from the battery pack and actually lets you use home appliances out and about without being plugged in. So let's check that out in the back. So one of the other really cool features about doing electric conversions in classic campers is they're obviously a lot more than just a car. They're camper vans in a lot of circumstances. We do have some van conversions and some minibus conversions, but one thing that we've always found is we kind of came up with the idea a little bit just because we thought it would be a fun thing to feature. But it also came from traditionally in camper van conversions, if you wanted to do primarily off-grid camping or cooking. So picture this, you've driven a little while, you've stopped at a nice kind of viewpoint in the middle of the countryside, you fancy popping on the kettle to have a cup of tea, and traditionally in a camper you would need a gas stove. So you'd have a gas bottle somewhere down in the depths of your cupboards, and then you'd have a gas system, so you'd click a gas hob on and you'd boil your kettle and away you go. Now we always found that was a little bit of it just didn't match up with everything else that we were doing in the vehicle. And we thought, well, you can get induction hobs and you can get electrification systems. So why can't we try and kind of join those two together? So we spent a long time finding a real ideal unit that would be able to take the battery power of your high voltage battery pack and transfer it into AC power to use elsewhere in the vehicle. And we have that system now. So if you would like off-grid power along with your electric conversion, it's not a ton extra to add that on. And then we can fit as many little extra systems around the vehicle as you want. So in this particular vehicle, that's paramount in two specific areas. One is I've got some plug sockets underneath my bum, and those are strategically positioned. So they've got USB chargers and 3-pin plug chargers on there as well. So you can run a laptop from those. You could technically run, like if you were camping with a tent as well, then you can blow up lilos, things like that. Anything that, I mean, I don't know why I need to come up with a list, but anything that would normally require a 3-pin plug can use those two as well. Now, it's a 1.5 kilowatt output, so it won't power anything hugely powerful, but it has got safety systems built in. So if you did try and run your hair straighteners on that one and your hair dryer on that one and a heater on that one, then the system would just go, no thank you. You can't do that anymore. But the simple way of turning it on is you need to have either the ignition turned on or you need to have the vehicle plugged into charge, which is no big deal. So you're just turning the ignition. I mean, it's on right now, so it's not like traditionally where you have the engine running to charge the alternator, to charge your 12 volt to make sure nothing died and you're chugging away. It doesn't do that anymore. I'm just on right now, not really doing anything. So in this system, we've got a little button down here next to the plugs, which turns the AC/DC system on. Beep. The hob has registered that it's now getting power, and I can turn that hob on. So I don't have a kettle to go on top of here, but I can turn the system on and I can turn it up. Now I've just done that out of the way. This isn't going to work actually because it doesn't have a pan to put on top of it. And another safety feature of induction hobs, it's going to get really cross with me. So I'm going to turn that off so it doesn't shout at me. But we just think it's such a smart system, and it really, really utilizes not just the kind of core technology that we've perfected of doing electrification for the driving, but how do you take that kind of nucleus of electric power and actually make your life with a camper van all the more enjoyable as well. So I just wanted to quickly show you our other camper here that we have on show. Now this one again has the same electric conversion system that's been installed, but it kind of wanted to give you the example of the blank canvas that it creates. So this is a panel van conversion. Now the customer is considering putting some kind of camping interior in here, but the point is none of this has been compromised by our electric conversion system. So unlike some other companies where they would have to put battery boxes into the vehicle, that would take up all your space and would severely impact the options that you're going to have to really make this a versatile space. That's not the case with an eDub conversion system. So you can do whatever you want back here. You can keep it as a panel van, you could put shelving in here, you could put full camping interior in here, but the point is we're not going to stop you from achieving exactly what you want. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions at all, either drop it in the comments below or contact us at edubconversions.co.uk. We would love to hear from you. Why not hit that subscribe button, and why not share this video with someone that you know who loves classic camper vans nearly as much as I do. Thank you again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.